Hi, everybody. It's James Lilacs, and you know it's getting hot in this madcap presidential summer. But we're keeping it cool at Ricochet.com, where it's meaningful and civil. And you can join us for free at Ricochet.com/join. We'll give you a free month to get you started. And after that, a membership's just a few bucks a month, and it's money well spent to stay sane and sharp in this cycle. Ricochet.com/join to get your first 30 days for free.
Welcome to Mad Dogs and Englishmen, Sin City sequel. This is our second podcast from here in Nevada. The last one was done from my living room, as I recall, when I used to live here in the suburbs of Las Vegas. I no longer do, so we are both tourists now, broadcasting from Charles's luxury suite in the, we won't say.
We can say, because by the time it goes up.
I guess. Well, I'll just hear it, Aria. No big deal. I was going to try to think of something funny, but I couldn't think of anything really funny. Circus, maybe? Or,
No. They have an old aerodynamics sit-down corkscrew roller coaster inside the building.
Yeah.
Built in 94. I've been on it once.
Very nice. Very nice. So, before we get started talking about other stuff, though, let's talk about Las Vegas for a minute. So, your second time here, what are your impressions?
Well, the weather is extraordinary, and I know we always start with the weather.
Yeah.
It's 110.
Something like that.
It is dry. When you walk out of the hotel, you're hit with a wall of dry heat, like being inside a hairdryer. I love that feeling. It's familiar to me because I spent summers in Los Angeles and in Phoenix when I was growing up, but it's unfamiliar to me because it is about as far away from the English experience as you can get. And it's not similar either to the south of France or Italy, both of which have phenomenal weather, but not quite like this. There are no clouds in the sky. This is, if I could choose a climate, the one that I would choose. That's my first impression on my third visit to Las Vegas.
Oh, I forgot it's your third. Yeah, not your second.
Well, the last time I was here, I stayed with you, but the time before that, I was 17. So I couldn't do much. I couldn't drink. I couldn't fire a gun. I couldn't gamble. In fact, I couldn't even loiter. There were what are laws or rules within the casinos. They will move you on if you stand around the machines and you're underage.
Right, yeah. People think of Nevada and Las Vegas specifically as being this kind of libertarian paradise. I always try to disabuse people of this notion that it's actually, in fact, one of the most regulated economies in the country. You can go to jail here real quick for organizing a card game at your house. Gambling is not legal here. Prostitution, people think, is legal in Las Vegas. It isn't actually, although there are legal brothels not too far from here. I was thinking about that.
Concealed carry doesn't apply to the casinos.
That's right. It's a unionized, highly regulated economy. And I was thinking, though, and I mentioned some of this in my weekend piece, that there's some examples of libertarian failures here. And we're here for Freedom Fest, which is the annual big libertarian confab here in Las Vegas. And I was thinking specifically of the case of prostitution. So there is legal prostitution within, a 45-minute drive, I guess, of Las Vegas, and as I understand, it's pretty convenient. They'll send a car for you if you make a booking or whatever. But it hasn't provided the sort of benefits that the kind of anti-prohibitionists always say. And it's a little bit like what I discovered with the situation with legalizing marijuana in Colorado, which is, yes, it does provide some benefits, and I am in favor of that as a policy, and I'm also in favor of legalizing prostitution as a policy. But it doesn't actually do all the things that libertarians really want it to do. So, for instance, not too far from here on West Tropicana, you will see street corners full of young women, mostly underage or addicts, who are still, plying the trade that they always have been. This hasn't taken prostitution off the streets. It hasn't really diminished the influence of organized crime or of human trafficking in the, massage parlors and stuff around here. And I think it's a kind of arguably a case of not doing enough deregulation. So there are only a very small number of legal brothels. They are very expensive compared with street-level prostitution, which I guess is about $20 or $25 typically on the street. The ones that are the sort of, hotel room casino stuff is a couple of $100. whereas the ones at the brothels can be quite expensive, well over $1,000, depending on what you're looking for. So it hasn't actually cleared out the market for illegal services. So legalizing a little bit, or legalizing just sort of halfway, doesn't really seem to have done the trick. But I was hanging out with Nick Gillespie from Reason Magazine the other day, and he was joking, looking around the casino where we were, saying, hopefully the whole world soon will look like this. And I don't think that's actually a very good thing. I mean, I love Vegas and I love Nevada, and there's some very, very good things to be said about it. But this is not, I think, what I would want my kind of theoretical libertarian utopia to look like in a lot of ways.
Well, because you're not hot on gambling either, per se.
No, I'm not. I mean, gambling, especially in its current form, which is kind of the worst example of crony capitalism in America. It's a cartel-run business under political discipline in which the government is absolutely a partner. Taking generally something like 70% of the profit, so it's basically a majority partner. It's a bad, ugly, exploitative business. I don't think much of it. Again, I think people should be allowed to do it, but having the government involved in that as a partner, I think, is distasteful and ethically questionable in a lot of ways. The great thing about Las Vegas and the terrible thing about Las Vegas is that it really is an example of what it looks like when the lowest common denominator, if you will, the average version of what the sort of middle-class American appetite looks like when it comes to fruition. And it's not great. I mean, it's not great. It's not beautiful. It's not, casinos are not like they are in James Bond movies or, old Rat Pack movies and things like that. They're kind of gross. They smell bad. And it's not people sitting around in tuxedos playing, baccarat. It's adult video games and, people in flip-flops and sweatsuits just feeding, coins to them one after another. And it can be a fairly ugly scene. Now, I like the fact that the other parts of the sort of, freedom ethic in Nevada are great. And having lived here, once you get outside of the part of Las Vegas that's the tourist part of Las Vegas, it's a very, very different kind of place. It's very conservative. It's a very church-going, outdoorsy, sporting, shooting. People love their guns here. They love to shoot. They love to hunt. It's a lot what I think that Southern California would be like with better government and a less crazy, California local culture. So it's in some ways the best and worst of what the United States has to offer. So I guess it's a good place to have a libertarian festival.
Right, being that libertarians are the best and the worst of America.
Yes, we kind of are. We kind of are.
Well, we've seen the best and the worst of America in the last 10 or 11 days.
Oh, goodness, yeah.
You wrote a piece saying it's not 1968, which we'll come to. I think it's an important point. As upset as people are, rightly so, over the happenings of the last 11 days, it's still a pretty good time to be alive. Crime is low. Life expectancies are high. You can get pretty much anything you want at the supermarket. We do not have legal segregation. And thus far, at least, touch wood, we're not seeing a series of high-profile political assassinations. But it has been an odd 2 weeks. We had Hillary Clinton's exoneration, or at least Hillary Clinton's condemnation, followed by her exoneration.
Yes.
We
Very
had
strange.
the resurgence of complaints from Black Lives Matter, followed by a shooting in Dallas of police officers, then terrorism in France, and today a military coup in Turkey.
Yeah, not quiet times.
Not quiet times. It's funny, the Chinese phrase, may you live in interesting times, is often presented in a positive light. I want the opposite.
Yes. Just to interrupt, by the way, that's a fake proverb.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, it's one of those like Hillary Clinton's "it takes a village to raise a child" thing. So the Chinese curse "may you live in interesting times" is a totally made up thing. It's not anything to do with any actual Chinese.
So it's from a fortune cookie, which were invented in San Francisco in 1966.
Right, let's chop suey. So I mean, there's a whole world of fake proverbs out there, and they're usually it's either an African proverb, like Africa's like one place with with one set of proverbs. It's not a whole bunch of cultures. It's just one place. And or Native Americans, of course. Always, if it's sort of like an environmentalist hippy dippy thing, it always gets
Fracking is bad, African proverb.
Yes, presented as a Native American proverb. Of course, also there were a lot of Native American cultures that didn't share a single body of proverbs, but for whatever reason, people like to attribute that to us. Some way dopey observations get attributed to Albert Einstein or Mahatma Gandhi.
Was it Orwell who said that one of the problems with Western civilization is we're endlessly convinced that Eastern civilizations are superior and mystical?
I don't know if that was Orwell that said that, but it sounds like something.
We're doing fake attributions all over the place today. One of my favorite ever tweets was somebody wrote, "What's an African proverb? Africans."
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's not as if they sit around saying, American proverb, Philadelphia proverb.
There's probably Philadelphia proverbs in Baltimore and some other places that have a very strong local kind of linguistic culture that way.
Anyway, it's been an odd 2 weeks, whether the Chinese had predicted the reactions or not.
Yeah, but I was going to say I'm with you on that I think you and I both agree that although there have been a lot of material advancements since then, we wouldn't want to give up. Yuval Levin gets into this in his last book, that immediate post-war period, the sort of Eisenhower years, the early 60s, really was a kind of golden age without much going on. It was the most boring time in American history.
Well, and the 20s as well.
Right. Yeah, sure.
And it wasn't that the 20s was set against a backdrop of inertia, but the complaints that one saw during the 1920s strike me, and have always struck me, as being insane. You see this today with people who run off and join ISIS. They will inevitably turn out to have been wealthy or to have been plugged in to the culture that they abandoned, but to have hated it nevertheless. And the complaints always seem similar to me to those that were preferred by the Italian futurists in the 1920s. Life is boring, we're too commercial, why are you so fixated on getting yourself a fridge freezer, why do you want a Model T Ford, why do you want electricity, we really should be blowing things up. Ross Douthat wrote a fantastic column in the New York Times a few years ago pointing out that actually totalitarianism is exciting and it is appealing. And while most people would be quite happy living a life of material wealth and improving upon the lot of their ancestors, there will always be some people who want to join what are essentially cults. And I'm fascinated by the 1920s in the same way I'm fascinated by the 1950s and early 60s and by the 1990s, in that you had this extraordinary material prosperity, these extraordinary advancements. People could, for the first time, do all sorts of things that they could never have done before, that either didn't exist at all or were the preserve of the rich. And yet there was this undercurrent of dissatisfaction and the belief in some quarters, and it should be said some quarters of the right as well, that we were all getting soft and that what we really needed was a good war, or at least a good national unifying event to remind us of the perennial struggle.
That, what your generation really needs is a good war.
And I just think it's ridiculous. I mean, it is... well, no, there are no good wars, but it's also a failure to appreciate good when it comes along. I like the fact that for most of my childhood, the conversations that I had revolved around email and how small this new cell phone was and how well Johnny's dad was doing with his new business. And isn't it wonderful that Patrick's grandmother has survived thanks to keyhole surgery, which didn't exist before. I imagine it must have been wholly salutary for people to get their first car or their first refrigerator or their first radio, to tune in and hear the baseball on the East Coast, if they were living in Utah, that they would never ever have accessed were it not for these miracles of technology. And I don't understand why people want to make their lives more dangerous and more, in inverted commas, exciting when normal civil society is exciting enough.
Did you happen to see the exhibit of Italian Futurist art in New York about 2 years ago?
I didn't, but I read a review of it, and that's what prompted my memory.
It was fascinating, and what's interesting about it, and kind of also is part of our current moment was the everyone gets mad at me when I talk about this in context of the Trump movement. I think it's absolutely true, which is the sort of explicit homoeroticism of it, the rejection of the feminine, the rejection of femininity as being soft and accommodating and passive and all that sort of stuff when they wanted things that were hard and aggressive and all that. And there's actually this manifesto that they had, they're translated about why we reject the feminine categorically, and which seems like would make for less exciting Saturday nights. But hey, what do I know?
It also wouldn't last too long.
Yeah, it wouldn't last too long.
It'd be a one-generation movement.
Yeah, but we get a lot of that right now, and particularly in the Trump movement, this idea of Trump as the sort of super masculine kind of figure. Although I have a hard time seeing it. But what's interesting, though, is that it all ends up becoming indistinguishable from sort of 1970s gay kitsch, sort of Tom of Finland kind of stuff.
That's right.
So, these people who are, convinced that they are, the epitomes of masculinity traditionally understood, which is saying heterosexual masculinity. I'm talking about being alpha males, meaning that they, really command the attentions of females around them, have picked up essentially gay iconography. And, of course, this is part of the Third Reich and the Italian fascists and all the rest of it. But I've been surprised by how much of, I always forget the sculptor's name that Hitler loved so much, and his famous sculpture was called Comradeship, and it's just sort of the gayest sculpture ever made. And you see it in all these Twitter abbeys of these, alt-right types and things like that. And it was something that was understood as a kind of gay icon in its time, which in the 1920s, 1930s was not something that was, really talked about all too much. Now it seems sort of as obvious as the cover of a Village People album. But, of course, in the 1970s, a lot of people were listening to the Village People, not understanding what they were really listening to, that it was this, gay kitsch performance. It's like there's a wonderful part at the beginning of Behind the Candelabra, which is that little Liberace movie, which is really creepy and hard to watch, by the way. I don't recommend it.
Is it Matt Damon?
It's Matt Damon and Kirk Douglas, or Michael Douglas, rather. And where Matt Damon's character is sitting in the audience watching Liberace perform with one of his gay friends and saying, yeah, Liberace right here in Vegas, I mean, he's what Vegas is all about, and saying to him, they don't get that he's gay. They think it's just like a sort of showmanship.
People didn't realize.
Yeah, well, of course, he denied it to the end of his days, but that this whole thing was kind of a gay camp performance, and he was the highest paid entertainer in America. Of course, he's a bit conservative, too. Big anti-communist, so it's always a little more complicated than people think. But it's a long way of getting back to, yes, I too, as a sort of Eisenhower Republican or Eisenhower conservative, prefer quiet times to interesting times. And a lot of the stuff that's interesting going on right now, or exciting in the world, is bad stuff.
Well, it's also because I think that the potential downside to harmony is the softening of the people. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean that in the way you've just described Trump fans mean that. Mm-hmm. I don't mean it becomes too feminized. I don't mean it becomes unmasculine. I mean that it can afford people an opportunity to forget why it was that their material prosperity materialized in the first place, right, and what it is that keeps them free and rich. But that, although that is a problem, pales in comparison to the potential problems that flow when strife is felt abroad the land.
Sure, yeah.
Because at that point, people rise up and say, I have a solution, a radical solution, and you should follow me, and I will implement it. And I think that is, historically speaking, far more likely to cause the downfall of free societies than too much prosperity.
Yeah, crisis almost always brings about bad outcomes. Revolutions almost always bring about bad outcomes, even when they're revolutions against regimes that richly deserve being rebelled against. One of the classic examples is Haiti, of course, which the Haitians rose up, threw off the slavers, which absolutely they should have done. But revolutions tend to create these moments of crisis. Can either be filled by, if you're lucky, Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton and George Washington and these people who had, read the right things, had the right ideas, understood where they were, or it gets filled by something else, which is, kleptocracy or bad, poisonous kind of ethnic and identity politics, various things like that. I mean, this is what happened in Germany, obviously. It's what happened in Russia. I mean, no one really thinks that the czars were great. It's what happened in Cuba.
Well, the Americans benefited greatly from a desire to restore.
Yeah.
The colonists did not see themselves as breaking with the past. They saw themselves as restoring it. Now, on top of
they were making America great again.
Exactly. On top of that, they added a level of radicalism with the Constitution, with religious toleration and so forth that was not there before. But if you read through the missives of the period, they are all conciliatory. They are aimed at the king's conscience.
Yeah.
They say, we wish to enjoy our ancient British liberty, our birthright. They don't say, unlike, say, the French Revolution, all that has gone before is bad and needs to be replaced down to the calendars and the clocks. And I think that's one of the mistakes in interpreting history that people make, is they see the American Revolution as being a revolution in the mold of most other revolutions, when of course it wasn't.
Yeah. Well, the thing about that is that, and this is one of those great examples of how it's usually the unsexy, undramatic, dare we say, boring kinds of things that really make a society work. The American Revolution wasn't fought for freedom of speech, although it was something that instituted freedom of speech. It wasn't fought for the right to keep and bear arms, so that ended up becoming part of it, or freedom of religion or any of the rest of this stuff. It was a revolution perpetrated by men of property to secure property rights. And no one ever gets excited about property rights. There's never been a great poem written about property rights. There's never been a great play about property rights. Never really been a great movie about property rights, but they're the fundamental thing. And if you're a society that gets that aspect of it right, then the rest of this stuff kind of flows naturally from it. So the regime that they were seeing putting in place was one that comported very well with, well, let's have freedom of speech, let's have freedom of assembly, let's have government that's accountable through direct redress and regular elections and all the rest of that kind of stuff, where people keep and bear arms to protect their property and their lives, where instead of having a monarch telling you which faith you have to believe in or which church you have to go to, that people can more or less sort it out themselves, because you've got this bedrock of property, which is what really ensures that normal, everyday material life can go on in a way that's going to be decent and that is not going to end in periods of revolutionary or pre-revolutionary crises.
Yeah, I remember you wrote this essay a while back for National Review online and posited that property is the prerequisite. And you described the pursuit of happiness line in the Declaration of Independence as an Epicurean flourish, and suggested it would have been better for America.
I don't think those are my words, actually. I think that's quoting someone.
Oh, were you?
Yeah.
Well, you suggested anyway that it would have been better for America if Jefferson had plagiarized Locke completely,
right,
rather than partially, and just said property.
Yeah.
I think that's right. I wonder how many people know that he was stealing from John Locke. And funnily enough, this ties in with our new sponsor, which is the Great Courses Plus.
Oh.
If you listen to other Ricochet podcasts other than ours, you may already have heard about this. But if you haven't, I will tell you all about it. The Great Courses is offering an exciting new video learning service called the Great Courses Plus. The Great Courses Plus will give you unlimited access to over 7,000 video lectures, which you can access from your TV, your laptop, your tablet, and even your smartphone. The one that I have seen is called The Surveillance State, Big Data, Freedom, and You. And this course you will hear from legal expert and Professor Paul Rosenweg as he tackles the tough questions about surveillance and data in the 21st century. There are lectures on balancing security and liberty, post-9/11 reforms such as the Patriot Act, drones, hacking and piracy, and so forth. And as usual, we have a special offer for listeners of this podcast. If you sign up at thegreatcoursesplus.com/ricochet, that's thegreatcoursesplus.com/ricochet, you will immediately get 1 month free, and you can watch as many lectures with that as you want. So you'll get access to the surveillance state, big data, freedom, and you, as well as 7,000 other lectures on anything and everything. And that really does mean anything and everything. That's history, business, how to cook, play chess, speak Spanish, and you can watch these anywhere. So if you go to thegreatcoursesplus.com/ricochet, you can get started and never ever be left behind again.
Speak Spanish, you rhino. You cuckservative.
I speak French. God knows how rhino-like I am.
Well, you and I are both francophiles. We have another new sponsor, right? Are we supposed to start doing that one yet, or is that for a while?
No, that's next time.
That's next time.
We'll spare our listeners for this week.
That one. Did you see the article in Wired on Ricochet?
I didn't.
They had a piece a couple days ago, I think. The headline was something like, "Conservatives now have their own podcast network."
Oh, now?
Yeah, I was. Yeah, it's been going on for a while, guys. Welcome to the club. Welcome to the party. But it was actually a pretty good piece.
You know, that reminds me of a wonderful Yahoo News piece from 3 or 4 years ago. The headline was something like, "Drug legalizers gain ally in unusual location. National Review Online." And the guy who wrote this had no idea that it's been the editorial position since the 70s.
Yeah, and in some ways before that even.
Absolutely. And Buckley went even further than marijuana. He would have legalized all drugs.
Yeah. Although he had some fairly eccentric opinions about that stuff. I think one of them was mandatory capital punishment for people who sold them to children. Which, okay, maybe, I don't know. That seems a little harsh.
Well, he's balancing it out.
Yeah.
I mean, we joke, and of course I don't endorse that because I'm against the death penalty, but I have said to people in the past who've asked me about my views on guns that I am of the view, especially in a country such as America, which has 400 million guns in private hands already, that almost no laws work. But I would be quite happy giving somebody 10 years if they point a gun at another person in anger.
Sure.
Maybe more.
Yeah. What's one of the things that drives me crazy about this whole discussion we're having right now about, the gun control stuff in light of Orlando and the other shootings that we've seen and the rest of it, even though we are at a period of, as you mentioned earlier, very low violent crime, is that we do have a lot of gun laws on the books that simply don't get enforced, or they don't get enforced very much. In the state of Illinois, the average sentence for being illegally in possession of a gun, which is, say, typically someone who's arrested with it on the street and they're not supposed to carry it because they don't have a license or whatever. Now, granted, I think Illinois should make it easier to get a license, but that to one side, it's a couple of months, typically. And most of those cases never get prosecuted. More than half never get prosecuted. If you look at the ratio of gun seizures in Chicago and Illinois to prosecutions and convictions for illegal guns, is tiny. They don't prosecute hardly any of those cases. Straw buyer cases, the U.S. attorney there simply will not prosecute because he doesn't think they're important cases. New York, actually, as we've probably talked about a little bit before, is actually a good example on the other side, where they actually, because of the Sullivan Act and stuff, have...
which has been there for 109 years.
But yeah, pretty good laws on that. So if you're illegally carrying a handgun in New York, and again, New York should make it easier to get a license for people like Charles C.W. Cooke. But if you don't, and you're caught illegal with a gun, you will do 2 years.
Or even if they have no licensing system at all, they have just concealed and open carry. Yeah. If you are prohibited from carrying a firearm, then they should come down on you like a ton of bricks.
Right, and so we have these liberals who want to, these so-called liberals, who want to make life harder for licensed gun dealers who really aren't the problem, or for people like you and I who are gun enthusiasts and buy our guns from licensed gun dealers for the most part. But then if you said, okay, well, what if we had 20-year sentences for committing a felony while in possession of a firearm illegal? Oh, well, no, that's crazy. It's mandatory sentencing. This is too harsh. We have too much incarceration. Blah blah blah. All this sort of stuff. Well, do you want to deal with this crime and punish it or not? And they really don't. It's total cultural war stuff. It's about who the target is, not about whether a particular policy is going to be effective or not. And so you end up policing the innocent rather than policing the actual criminal.
And now we're having a debate as to whether we can prevent terrorists from committing atrocities if we tighten... Well, no, I was going to say if we tighten our gun laws, but as we've seen in Nice, and I haven't written this or said this because this happened last night.
Yeah.
And I don't want to trivialize the loss of life. I don't want to sound churlish or insert levity where it doesn't belong. But I'm not going to do that now. I'm going to make a serious point, and that is that I have far more sympathy for progressives who want to change the gun laws to diminish the steady flow of violence within inner cities. I think they're wrong, but I have far more sympathy for them than those who react to terrorist attacks by suggesting we should change the gun laws. For a couple of reasons. Firstly, we have an open society. We want an open society. We don't want metal detectors everywhere. We don't want the FBI tracking people as a matter of course. We don't want every microphone on every computer being listened to 24/7. And I don't want the Second Amendment to be restricted either. And that being so, it is easy for somebody who wishes to do a lot of harm to do a lot of harm. It's not impossible for the authorities to prevent them, but it is tough, and we are going to have to accept that. We can do whatever we can to stop it, of course, but we're not going to give up our way of life. That seems pretty clear. And so, whatever it is, the chance that is available to those who would cause a great deal of damage is a considerable one. The second thing is, within that context, terrorists seemingly will use whatever they can get their hands on. It's a cliche, but it's true. If they can get a semi-automatic rifle, they'll get one. If they can get a truck and kill more people, it seems, than with any semi-automatic rifle attack I can remember, they'll do that. If they can get their hands on explosives or grenades or a crock pot, I believe, in Boston, a pressure cooker, then they'll do that. And although, again, we should try to stop this, selectively honing in on the tools seems to me the wrong way of going about it.
Yeah, some idiot just tweeted at me a second ago that, being sarcastic, oh my God, they used a truck. That means that we should make TNT sales available at grocery stores to save our freedoms, blah, 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 this and that. Whenever I like getting things like this from people because they don't know that explosives actually are sold over the counter that way. Not at grocery stores, but certainly at hardware stores and construction supply stores in certain parts of the country that you can buy explosives with the driver's license or a form of ID. McVeigh, obviously, the fertilizer bomb. What we're seeing right now that's worrisome to me is that the Islamic State is tactically different from Al-Qaeda, which Al-Qaeda wanted to do big 9/11 style stuff and nothing else, whereas the Islamic State is perfectly happy to inspire someone to drive a truck through a crowd. And that ends up being a much more difficult thing to deal with. So I wonder, I was asking this question here at Freedom Fest because, libertarians tend to be sometimes either weak or conflicted or not to have really super well developed ideas on national security. What is a libertarian response to Nice? And again, not to be cheap about it, you love the French, I love the French. Maybe not the most popular view among conservatives to be Francophiles, but I know we both are. So not to, exploit what happened there, but I think it is a worthwhile question that if you're, say, Gary Johnson and you're running for president as a libertarian and you want to talk about non-interventionism and you want to talk about, let's not have a surveillance state and not have this huge national security apparatus, which he's right about a lot of these things, don't get me wrong. But what do you do about a situation like that? And so if you're Charles C.W. Cooke, empowered to take this on, what does a policy look like for dealing with what's looking like the early stages of a kind of intifada?
Well, it's difficult. The obvious answer is to wait where your immigration comes from. Just play the numbers game. I'm not for open borders. I think it's reasonable to look at countries that export terror or are more likely to export people who will be influenced by ideas that are clearly leading to attacks. You obviously have to have a good set of intelligence services, but I'd slightly question the premise of your inquiry, in that people often say, well, what's the conservative alternative to Obamacare, which is a little bit like saying, what's the libertarian alternative to the Patriot Act? Not having one.
Yeah.
Now, that position, if we see a steady increase in the number of these attacks, will eventually become untenable. And at that point, I think the answer is, vague as it might be, you have to craft policies that are as precise as possible. Dragnets don't seem to work.
Linguistic aside, real quick though, as you know, I'm a student of accents and regional variation, so I always pay attention to the way you speak. And so something I've noticed is you say patriot, or patriotism, but Patriot Act.
Well, yes, because it's an American act. I think that's why.
Yeah.
Although I might say patriot and patriotism.
Or patriotic.
Or patriotic. I don't know.
Yeah, okay. Well, never mind.
No, I think you want to target your investigations. And that's not a new idea. I mean, that's why we have warrants.
Yeah.
And that's why we have due process. The temptation in these circumstances is always to overreact, and I think that's true on the right, and I think that's true on the left. And if people look through my writing, or my television and radio and podcast appearances, and my Twitter feed, they will see that after a shooting, I say, let's not overreact. And I say the same thing after terrorist attacks, when they don't involve firearms. You won't find me sitting on Twitter saying, we need a new Patriot Act, we need to spy on people, we need to tail Muslims. I do think that there is something to be said, as I said at the outset, for an immigration policy that seeks to limit the number of people who come from war-torn countries or from countries without the same cultural values as ours. I think that you had a lovely line once, libertarianism in one country. I'm not quite proposing that, but I do think that...
Also not mine originally. I think you're attributing all sorts of stuff to me about stealing wantonly from other people. There must be a balance somewhere between the libertarian or classically liberal value of having free exchange of labor and movement and ideas, and limiting your freedom because you have free exchange of labor and movement and ideas. And if, and again it's an if we reach a point at which the question is, should we limit immigration from dangerous parts of the world, or should we allow it and restrict the freedom of the people who are already here so that immigration does not cause a crisis? I'm going for the former. Yeah,
and that's an if. That's a big if, because I don't want to overreact, and I have never overreacted on this, and I won't overreact. We're still very, very, very safe.
Yeah, no, I've written quite a bit on this, that I think that our current immigration policy is bad for a lot of reasons in a lot of ways. We don't do much about illegal immigration. Our legal immigration policy is pretty bad. It should be primarily economically driven, but there should be a sort of, gateway that's the security question first. And, you really do need to do different levels of background checks and screening and surveillance and oversight for people coming from different parts of the world. It seems to me just entirely sensible. You can make a good policy out of that, or you can make a ham-fisted, beef-witted Donald Trump policy out of it, saying, we're Muslims, immigrants, and it's a good example, I think, of how you can take the same basic idea and make a good policy out of it or a bad policy out of it. One thing I was thinking of, though, as we start to wind down here, is that I know you're a relative newlywed and you've got a new child at home, and I am someone who likes to go to bed about 9 o'clock at night. So we should talk about all the bad decisions we're going to make in Las Vegas tonight.